According to the Pentagon, more than $11.3 billion were spent just in the first 6 days of the Iran war. That's $1.3 million per minute, or $188,000 per second. But here's the kicker. That was just the cost of the munitions alone. And even more interestingly, the most expensive munitions used by Americans didn't even explode. In the first 6 days of Operation Epic Fury, roughly 2,500 targets were struck inside Iran. And by day 40, that number had increased multiple times.
Since the beginning of major combat operations, the United States Joint Force has struck more than 13,000 targets.
Assuming that destroying each of those 13,000 targets required an average of 1.2 munitions, that's over 15,000 missiles fired, bombs dropped, and suicide drones launched by the United States. And that's just the offensive munitions used. To intercept the missiles and suicide drones that Iran was firing toward US military establishments, Israel, and the Gulf states, thousands of defensive missiles had to be spent. But why the munition consumption rate dropped from $2 billion per day to just $500 million, and how a weapon known for its pinpoint accuracy made the biggest error imaginable, is not what you think.
Only 1% of the munitions we're using today are standoff munitions.
Let me break down what that means. This is a Tomahawk missile. Those are pigeons. And this is a GBU-35 Joint Direct Attack munition. They're identical in that both weapons carry a 1,000-pound warhead and can deliver it to a target with pinpoint accuracy. But the Tomahawk costs $3.5 million, roughly 100 times more expensive than the GBU-35. Why? That premium is paid for one reason: safety. The Tomahawk has a range of 800 to 1,000 miles. This means a salvo of Tomahawks can be launched from a ship sitting out in the ocean, far from the action, and hit their targets precisely. On the other hand, the GBU-35 JASSM has a range of 9 to 17 miles. That means you need an airplane to fly very close to the target before dropping that bomb, which easily puts the airplane and its crew within the range of the enemy's air defense systems. The GBU-35 is a stand-in weapon, while the Tomahawk is considered a standoff weapon. It takes 1.5 to 2 years to produce one Tomahawk missile, and that's a big part of why it's so much more expensive. On that note, the US Army broke 2 records with its long-range precision strike missile, also known as PRISM. Not only did they fire this missile for the first time in combat during Operation Epic Fury, but reportedly they've also used up their entire stockpile of PRISMs. According to Secretary Hexeth, by day 14, only 1% of the munitions used were the expensive standoff munitions. In case it's not obvious, that's because the majority of the standoff munitions were used in the first couple of days to target Iran's missile launchers and their air defense systems. Once bombers and fighter jets could fly in Iranian airspace with relative impunity, they switched over to the much cheaper glide bombs and short-range missiles. But getting to that level of air superiority came at a huge cost. According to estimates from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, 319 Tomahawk missiles were launched from American destroyers and submarines toward Iran in the first 6 days of the war. That alone costs $1.2 billion. But that's only a fraction of the $5.5 billion offensive munitions used during that same time period. Almost twice as many AGM-158 JASSMs, estimated to cost $2.8 billion, were fired toward Iran. But the reason wasn't just because JASSMs were cheaper than Tomahawks. As you'll see in a minute, Tomahawks have a big logistical limitation. JASSM is a cruise missile, similar to the Tomahawk. But the biggest difference is their launch platform. JASSM is air-launched by multi-role combat aircraft as well as bombers. It has half the price and 1/4 of the range of a Tomahawk missile. Although the extended range variant, JASSM ER, has a 600-mile range. This means even a C-130 can airdrop a pallet of JASSMs over the Arabian Sea, and those missiles will go through a specific window of a specific building deep inside Iran. But here's the thing, JASSM's shape make it a stealthy cruise missile. So in contrast to Tomahawk, which relies on low-altitude flight to avoid radar detection, JASSM can fly at higher altitudes. Now, imagine a B-2 stealth bomber launching a JASSM. Enemy radars cannot see the launch platform. They also can't see the missile itself. The only thing visible is the explosion upon impact. But there's one more advantage that JASSM has over Tomahawk, which, to be fair, has nothing to do with the missile itself, but rather its launch platform. The Vertical Launch System, or VLS, that's the core weapon system on the US Navy's Arleigh Burke destroyers, cannot be reloaded at sea. These ships have 90 to 96 VLS cells on board, which are loaded with a mix of Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack, SM-2 and SM-6 missiles for air defense, and SM-3s for ballistic missile defense, among other things. VLS can fire in rapid succession and also from the forward and the aft sections of the ship near simultaneously. Compared to old-school arm launchers, VLS has almost no moving parts that can break. But once those missiles are spent, they cannot be reloaded at sea. That's because lowering a 25-foot-long missile canister into a VLS cell requires absolute stillness. So the ship has to go back to a port to be reloaded, which could take days just in transit time. In contrast, an FA-18 can take off from an aircraft carrier, use all the munitions it has, fly back to its base within an hour or so, and get reloaded.
Ready to bag! Bring it up! Straight up!
Destroying something is often a lot cheaper than the cost of protecting it. So it's not surprising that during Operation Epic Fury, defensive munitions have been even more costly than offensive munitions. In the first 3 days of the war, Iran launched 2,500 drones and missiles in retaliation. Shooting them down came with a $5.7 billion price tag. And 40% of that cost was just one type of missile, the SM-3. The SM-3 is quite unique, not just because it can cost upwards of $28 million per missile, but also because it has no explosive warhead. Other interceptors like the SM-2 home in on an incoming missile and then explode in its proximity. The fragmentation is enough to destroy the target. But the SM-3 uses a hit-to-kill system, meaning it slams directly into an incoming ballistic missile at speeds over 15,000 miles per hour. Just pure kinetic energy. And it does that outside the Earth's atmosphere during the mid-course flight phase of ballistic missiles. But what happens if the SM-3 fails? That's why almost $2 billion were spent on thought interceptors. This ground-based system is designed to catch anything the SM-3 misses, intercepting ballistic missiles as they re-enter the atmosphere just minutes before impact. The US military launched 83 SM-3 missiles and 158 thought interceptors. This was a hefty cost to neutralize hundreds of ballistic missiles launched by Iran at high-value targets. But the alternative would have been a lot more costly. After 40 days of conflict, it's obvious that munitions made up the biggest chunk of the costs for the United States. But that wasn't the only cost. Billions of dollars were also lost in damaged and destroyed equipment. 4 F-15s crashed, each worth $100 million. One of those F-15s crashed inside Iran, which resulted in 2 separate rescue operations to get the pilot and the weapon systems officer out. 2 MC-130J commando aircraft were destroyed by Americans themselves after getting stuck in an abandoned airfield in Iran, plus another 4 MH-6 Little Bird helicopters. 24 MQ-9 Reaper drones were also downed by Iran for a total replacement cost of almost $1 billion. 1 Chinook helicopter and 1 A-10 Warthog were also destroyed, plus numerous others that were damaged. The USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier suffered a laundry room fire that disrupted its operations. The damage estimate is unknown. And there were multiple radars and infrastructures that were destroyed by Iranian missiles. But all that can be replaced. What cannot be replaced is the human lives lost. 13 American personnel have been killed thus far. Iranian drone strikes on March 1, 2026 killed 6 people from the U.S. Army Reserve in Kuwait and 1 U.S. Army soldier in Saudi Arabia. When a KC-135 crashed in Iraq on March 12, 2026, all 6 crew members lost their lives. And let's not forget about all those killed in Iran. The Iranian officials say 2,000 people were killed, including military personnel and civilians. This is while the Jerusalem Post claims over 6,000 deaths just related to the IRGC members. But the civilian casualties cannot be ignored. One of the Tomahawk missiles launched on the first day of the conflict targeted a girls' elementary school in Iran, killing 26 teachers and over 120 students, becoming the deadliest civilian disaster and the single most costly action of Operation Epic Fury. A precision weapon is only as good as the intelligence behind it, and when that fails, precision means nothing. But costs cannot be looked at in a vacuum. We need to evaluate what the US government has gained in return. Regime change in Iran? Accomplished, but not in the way many had hoped. It's currently unclear who's really running the show, but IRGC is still in power. What changed was the people within the system, not the system itself. Weakening the Iranian military? That has certainly taken place, whether it's the Iranian Navy, the regime's missile stockpiles, or critical command and control infrastructure. Iran's nuclear program? Severely degraded and largely incapacitated after Operation Midnight Hammer and the follow-on Operation Epic Fury. But it hasn't been completely eliminated, and the location of much of Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpiles remain uncertain. Political unity? Fractured at best, both domestically and internationally, with some of the closest American allies like France, Germany, Australia, and the UK either criticizing or providing very limited support, with the exception of Israel, which was very actively involved in the strikes. And the stock market? They lost trillions of dollars in value, mostly impacted by global uncertainty and the surge in oil prices due to disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. But at some point, this war will end, and that's when it gets too expensive to continue.